Story number 1. Early to mid 1990s in Northern Ireland, I was a kid of around 8 or 9 years old. The sun was shining and it was sometime in early afternoon. My dad needed to return a library book in, well, a Protestant loyalist area in Belfast. We were Catholics and the Shankill was notoriously dangerous at the time. Still to a lesser extent, so I was already a little on edge. Just knowing the reputation of the place, and my dad was cool though. Didn't seem worried or anything. It's not like we have Catholic printed on our forehead. He did say, however, that I had to pretend to have a different name if anyone asked me. My name is one which marks you as a Catholic, so I adopted a Protestant name for the trip. We came to a road which led to an intersection across which was predominantly Catholic Republican enclave. We were headed to the right, down a long, winding path, but further up the road ahead towards the intersection, we could see a group of men. One of them was running back and forth across the road, relaying information between two pockets of people. Some were staring across the road towards the Catholic area, and some were talking to a man in a parked but running car. One in particular stuck out. He had long hair and a leather jacket and was very tall. At least compared to the other men. It all looked suspicious even to me as a child, although I didn't know why, but my dad's demeanor changed to a more serious and quiet tone, and I took it as a confirmation that we were not safe. He was from Belfast, since we were living in a town outside of Belfast at the time, and grew up when things were at their worst here, so he knew the ropes and knew the signs that something was happening. We weren't walking towards the men, so it wasn't a problem, and we crossed the right and started walking away. This is when a woman approached us. She was middle-aged with short red hair. She saw us coming and made a purposeful beeline towards us. She seemed preoccupied, nervous. She starts grilling my father immediately, asking who he was and where he's coming from. She was talking in a "I'm just trying my best to sound casual, but I'm failing" manner. Well, I could feel my entire body beginning to boil with fear, and I felt as though I was mere moments away from being, quote, discovered. It was like a horror movie where someone finds themselves in a small town where everyone's in a cult or something. And they're trying to blend in but are drawing suspicion, and are losing themselves in an ever-increasing paranoia. I suddenly had visions of my father getting shot and me screaming over his corpse. Maybe even getting shot myself, despite being a small child. The longer my father and the woman talked, the more I was starting to lose the ability to hear. As though my head was underwater, I was holding my father's hand and I was struggling to keep a grip because of the sweat pumping to my palms. I didn't know how or why, but something primal in me recognized that we were in serious danger. It was clear that she was a part of whatever was going on around the corner and was trying to manage and analyze the flow of foot traffic, especially that of a stranger like us. Given that she and us were the only people on the street, she had been doing a good job. She was fishing hard for information about us. My dad played it cool and responded to her questions without really revealing much, doing a much better job of being casual than she was. The area where we were from, he explained, was mixed, Protestant and Catholic, but he feigned displeasure at the fact, trying to signal that he hated Catholics, and was somewhat miffed to have to live amongst them, without ever actually using those words. It was a subtle, and I was terrified that I might need to participate in the conversation because there's no way I could dance around the truth as well as my father was doing. He explained that he was just here to return a book, which he showed her proof. She asked about me, my name, and I gave her the fake name. She surely read the terror in my face and I could hear in my voice. My dad decided that that was a waste of time and break off and say, "Nice to meet you, all the best," and started walking away. I could sense that the woman did not budge, and just stood and stared at us as we walked away. I glanced over my shoulder after about 30 seconds and just caught a glimpse of her, turning and walking towards the road where the men were gathered. We rounded a corner and were now at the top of a very long and steep road/path, with a library at the very bottom. The path was fenced on one side, and the other side was a row of houses. It felt like we were walking deeper into danger and that we only had two routes of escape: keep on going or turn back to where we came. About partway down the road, we realized we were being followed. My dad told me to run ahead and check that the library's opened. I hesitated. He said, "It's okay, just go and check." I glanced over my shoulder. It was the man in the leather jacket with long hair. I did what my dad wanted and ran ahead. My heart was pounding and ears pricked awaiting the crack of gunfire. I checked the door and it was opened and I ran back up. As I was coming back, I saw that the man in the leather jacket had turned and was making his way back up the road. My dad looked unfazed but was walking with a certain rigidity, like something had happened in the time it took me to run to the library and back again, and he hadn't quite unclenched his fist yet. He said, "It's okay, we are safe." I asked about the man following us. He said he sent me ahead, and when I was a safe distance, he stopped, turned around to face him, ready for whatever happened. He said he was expecting violence, but as he turned back around, the leather jacket dude immediately put his head down, turned and walked back the way he came. My dad watched him for a few seconds and then started making his way back towards me. That afternoon, within the hour we were there, a Catholic taxi driver was murdered in that street. The vibes that something terrible was going to happen were justified, and I've never felt as terrified as I did that day. When the news about the taxi driver was on TV that night, I knew I'd seen the planning of a murder, and I knew that we walked into the middle of it. I could probably have identified both the woman and the leather jacket man had I been asked about them by the police, but that was never going to happen. No way my dad would have volunteered himself, and therefore me, to the cops to be a witness against a terrorist cell. Story number 2. I used to sleepwalk when I was a child. We lived in a rough neighborhood in Decatur, Georgia, and I would wake up outside in the middle of the night, not knowing how I got there, and would have to walk home and walk into a darkened doorway I'd left wide open for whoever might be lurking around. However, the time that scared me the most was when I was about 9 years old. I woke up and found myself with the bedroom curtains drawn back and staring out the window. As I came awake, I noticed a very large and completely hairless man. No hair, eyebrows, etc., just staring at me, and slowly inching closer to the window and closer to my face. He was looking bewildered, like he wasn't sure what he was seeing. At that moment, I realized what he was going on, and I started screaming uncontrollably, frozen in place and peeing down my leg. The man also freaked out and screamed. I'm talking absolutely screaming. Did a tumbling move and then ran off in a weird zigzag like he was trying to dodge bullets. My mom woke up and thought I probably had a nightmare. The next morning, we found a screwdriver on the front porch and damage to the door jamb and door handle. I still just about pee my pants when I tell the story. But now it's usually from laughing. I'll never forget the look on his face when I started coming to life and screaming, or his high-pitched scream, or his duck and roll and dodging and bobbing all the way down the street. Story 3. I was with a guy for a couple of years when I realized that he's taken up smoking drugs as a hobby after work. We had numerous problems already, and I had 3 small kids, so I finally kicked him out for the hardcore drug use. A few days later, maybe a week, he makes a fake Facebook page and sends me a friend request. The only posts on the page were talking about hurting me and my children, and, well, hurting himself, and how he planned to do it that day. The most recent post was accompanied by a selfie of him in my backyard. A recent selfie, so he's been there. I was on my way home with the kids late in the evening when I got the request. I'd stopped by my parents' home that day before and gotten my dad's 9mm handgun because he was sending messages through mutual friends about burning my house down. I called the police as soon as I got home, and they didn't seem to think it was a big deal and didn't have an officer available to come check my house before we walked into it. I live in the middle of the woods and we have a rinky-dink police force. Anyways, I made the kids stay in the car and I gave my oldest instructions on what to do if anything happened. I had to sweep my own home in the dark with a 9mm in case he was there waiting for me and my children. It was absolutely terrifying. I had to check my entire house every time we came home for a while, and I was always worried that I'd eventually find him in there. Police were called numerous times, and I was eventually granted a restraining order a couple of weeks later, when the death threats continued. He died about a year ago, and all I felt was relief. Story 4. I was active duty in the Navy. Served aboard a submarine. We were in port one day, most of the crew had left. The guys on duty for the night, that's us, were given permission to bring our kids on board for dinner. Halfway through the meal, someone makes a 4MC announcement. 4MC is the emergency announcement intercom thing. Says there's light smoke in the engine room, quickly followed by fire in the engine room. We trained for this stuff religiously, so everyone's immediately in action. Commanding officer still there, but topside. One of our senior enlisted guys apparently ran the kids up front to the hatch where he was, quite literally, throwing them through the hatch as our CO caught them and set them to the deck topside. An oil pump had blown and filled the entire back half of the boat with atomized hydraulic fluid. A guy was moment from lighting a torch in the engine room as the casualty was called. Had it been called just a moment later, we would have walked into an inferno. Had he, for some reason, not heard it called and lit the torch when after we had run in, we'd have been on fire before we could even react. Turned out perfectly fine. Cleaned the oil that clung to all surfaces and fixed the pump. But it was somewhat surreal, understanding just how close we were to a wildly different result. Story 5. A year ago, I was hospitalized with an infection in my right lower leg. They drew a line a few inches below my knee and said if the infection spreads past this line, I'll lose my leg below the knee. They pumped me full of antibiotics, and it seemed to have worked. I had to finish my antibiotics regimen at a nearby rehab hospital. The day before I was transferred, my roommates and I were eating breakfast. He was an older gentleman, and when he slept, he made a weird gurgling noise. He said to a passing nutritionist that his breakfast should have come with 2 coffees. I heard that gurgling noise at the foot of his bed before the curtain that separated us. This was still during COVID, by the way. I was about to call a nurse when one ran in asking if he was okay. The guy was coding. All of a sudden, our room had nurses and doctors running in to save the guy. It was controlled chaos, procedures and medicine being used, being called out, whatnot. One nurse kept track of everything on laptop. I couldn't go anywhere. I was in the bed closest to the window. And, well, they kept pushing me closer to the window so more people could help him. They worked on him for over an hour. Yeah, a whole hour. They called the time of death shortly after that hour, and the doctor asked for a moment of silence. He saw me sitting up in my bed and came over and asked if I was all right. I said I was, even though I had tears in my eyes. Well, other nurses kept asking if I needed anything, and these people took me out to see if I was okay after what I've just witnessed. I asked one of the nurses to open the window for a bit. She smiled and understood what I meant. It was a sunny day and very peaceful outside the window. Even now, typing this out a year later, it brings tears to my eyes. Then I heard someone's final words on this earth. "Excuse me, miss, but my breakfast was supposed to come with 2 coffees." Story 6. I always parked in a certain spot at my last job for 12 years that I was there. It was accessible to the public as it wasn't company parking, but they wanted us to park in the back of the lot so the closer spots could be available for customers. One day, my spot's taken by a dark-tinted Cadillac, and I'm immediately mad because everyone knows it's my spot. It's morning shift, so 4 a.m., so it can't be one of the others because I know what they drive. So it must be a new person, or maybe another employee from another shop in the plaza. It's still there on my lunch break, and when I go home the next day, I come in at 1 p.m. till close and around 9:30, and then also the next. Something about it really bothered me. It smelled fishy. Literally, it's the South in high summer, and who knows what's baking in there. My dad was a Marine, then a police officer. He always said, if you feel something is wrong where it probably is, so I dialed the non-emergency contact police number. I felt like an idiot, but every time I walked by it, it just bugged me, so I was stuck waiting for over an hour before anyone shows up, and honestly, if I hadn't been off the next day, I would have been like, F it. But I waited. Mostly because I can really be a petty SOB, and that's my freaking spot. Darn it. So the police show up. All annoyed because who knows how many, quote, they can't park here calls they get. They run the license plate though, and things go crazy. They want my info, want me to contact my manager. Does this lot have cameras? Have I touched the car? Apparently the car is on an Amber Alert as the last sighting of a missing person who was a minor, a 15-year-old girl. When they pop the trunk, they find her dead, mutilated body under a blanket and the source of the smell. She had gone out with her much older, controlling, and insecure boyfriend, but had decided to get out of the relationship. I guess you could say she only made a mistake of getting into the car with him. He drove 3 counties over after torturing her, stuffing her in there, and who knows what else. Then parked and walked away. Left her to die. I think the thing that bothers me the most is I never learned her time of death. So it haunts me, sometimes thinking she might have been saved if I made a fuss earlier. So yeah, listen to your gut. Even if it seems to be a petty situation, you may save somebody's life.